Malt. Welcome to the second installment of the project initiated by the Education Committee called Kaufverband Nordamerika Eats. In our first video, we showed you how to make the Bavarian Beer Garden Classic Wurstsalat. And in this second video, we're going to explore Bavarian bread culture. And the one product that probably most typifies that bread culture is undoubtedly the pretzel. And more specifically, the Laugenbrezeln, which is a pretzel which is dipped in a lye solution prior to baking. But we'll talk about that a little further on in the video. Pretzels, they have a long history. The history dates back at least to the Middle Ages, where it was invented, or said to be, purported to be invented by monks as a fasting food, meant to be eaten during Lent, the 40 days prior to the Easter celebration. Thankfully, that has changed over the years, and pretzels are enjoyed all year round, all throughout Germany, but especially in the southern states of Bavaria and neighboring Baden-Württemberg, where, by the way, they have a slightly different recipe, and they make them in a slightly different way. They're enjoyed in Austria, the German-speaking cantons of Switzerland, the Alsace region of France, and Luxembourg, where they are also very popular. Their shape, that's what typifies pretzels. How did they get that shape? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. There are a couple of theories about that. Probably the most prominent ones are dating back to their origins in monasteries, where they were said to represent hands folded in prayer. Another theory is that they represent the Holy Trinity, one piece of bread, but three distinct sections. Another folk legend says that during the Middle Ages, there was a baker who was sentenced to death because he was caught cheating on the weight of his baked products. He would be granted clemency, however, if he could produce a bread product through which the sun could shine 3 times. And that's how the pretzel was invented. So whatever theory you believe as true or not true, the one thing that is true is that everybody knows that pretzels are delicious. So that's our goal today, is to make some pretzels. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the equipment you'll need and a little bit about the ingredients. Equipment, first and foremost, is this guy here, and that is a food scale. Make sure you get one that weighs in both ounces and grams. Why do you need a food scale? Because baking is an exacting art. Unlike cooking, where a pinch of that and a pinch of this will remedy a situation, baking isn't that forgiving. It is in some areas, but for the most part, it's a very exacting science. And the whole cups and teaspoons, and I could do a whole video on that, but that's not why we're here today. It's a very inaccurate way of scaling. So get yourself a food scale. They're not that expensive. I think I got this one, I forget, Bed Bath & Beyond or somewhere. But anyway, they're not that expensive. You don't need one with all the bells and whistles, but it's important for baking. The next thing are baking pans, and you can use whatever baking pans you have in your kitchen. I choose to use these standard, they're called half-sheet baking pans in the industry. I got this one from a local restaurant supply place, I believe. But like I said, you can use whatever baking pan you have. I use these because I know I can fit 6 pretzels on this baking pan. The next thing you need is a barrier between the pretzel and the baking pan, because as I said, pretzels are dipped in lye before they're baked in the oven. And that lye solution, if you place the pretzels directly on the metal baking pan, is going to cause a chemical reaction. You don't want that. So as I said, you need to provide a barrier between your pretzel, lye-dipped pretzel, and that metal baking pan. 2 options here. Baking parchment. Baking parchment, very useful. Reynolds, this is Reynolds, it makes one. That has little grids on it that you can cut out to the exact size of your pan. Make sure the most important thing that you consider is that it is a non-stick type of baking parchment. Otherwise, you're going to be peeling little schnipples of paper from the back of your pretzels after they're baked. So make sure if you're using baking parchment, you get a non-stick brand of baking parchment. The second option, and the one I prefer, is to buy these silicone baking mats. They're called Silpats in the industry. I think that's the trade name. You can get them at any restaurant supply place. You can go online and look for them. I think places like Michael's have them too. They are really, really, really good in baking because they last forever. They withstand temperatures of, I believe, 500 or 600 degrees. They're easy to keep clean. They're easy to store. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about them. This one, I believe I spent 10 or 11 bucks for at the same local restaurant supply place. So if you can, like I said, there's no need to run out and buy these. Your pretzels it's not going to make a difference in the way your pretzels turn out. It's just the convenience of using them. So either baking parchment or these silicone baking mats are things you need for baking pretzels. All right, let's turn our attention over here to the ingredients. And of course, with any bread dough, the main ingredient is the flour. All flour is not the same. For your pretzels, make sure, if you can find it, get a bread flour. A bread flour which has a higher protein content. This particular one, I believe, has a 12.7% protein content. So what? What's the big deal with the protein content? Well, the proteins in flour are what increase its ability to form gluten when it is mixed with a liquid and agitated or kneaded. So what? What's gluten? Well, gluten is that stretchable network of proteins after the dough is developed that traps the CO2, carbon dioxide gas, that is expelled by the yeast, feeding off the starch that is converted to sugar in your dough. And that being trapped, that CO2 gas being trapped, is what causes our bread dough to expand. The yeast action to expand the bread dough. So the more protein content you have in your bread flour, the better that dough's ability will be to trap gluten, form gluten, and then trap that gluten. You can use an all-purpose flour too. Your pretzels will be just fine. I'm a pretzel nerd, so I have to use this kind of bread flour. The one thing to make sure and to always remember, make sure your bread flour or your all-purpose flour is unbleached and unbromated. Okay, unbleached and unbromated. These are chemical processes that we use here in the US that are banned in the EU, Canada, Brazil, other places around the globe. Not sure why we still do it, but it's not really healthy for you. So make sure you use unbleached flour. Okay, next thing you're going to need, that's enough about flour. Next thing you're going to need is some unsalted butter at room temperature, 30 grams. Regular old salt, 20 grams. Yeast, and let's talk a little bit about yeast. The yeast I'm using is a granular yeast. It's called instant dry yeast or rapid rise yeast, or sometimes it's called, what's this one called? Fast rise yeast. That's fine to use. Everything will be just fine. You need 12 grams of that. Avoid using active dry yeast. Active dry yeast is another granular yeast, but you have to dissolve it in warm water, and it's just an inconvenient procedure. This you can add directly to your dough and everything will be fine. If, however, you can find fresh compressed yeast, use that. That also gives excellent results, but you have to triple the amount of yeast you're using. So I have 12 grams of instant dry yeast or fast rise yeast here. If you're lucky enough to find fresh compressed yeast, the little cubes and the foil wrappers, you need 36 grams of that yeast. and that will be on the recipe that we will provide for you at the end of the video. Next up is an ingredient that you don't necessarily need, but me being the pretzel nerd I am, yes, I have to use it because it is in a lot of pretzel recipes, and that is diastatic barley malt. Once again, you don't need this. Your pretzels will be just fine without it. Here's what it does for your pretzel dough. Diastatic barley malt has an enzyme in it that helps the yeast convert the starch into sugars that provide food for the yeast. So that gives you quicker, better volume in your bread dough. It also helps in the browning of the pretzels. It gives you that rich caramel color. And it also provides a slightly sweet, kind of malted flavor in the end product of the pretzels. But once again, you don't need it. Your pretzels will be just fine without it. I like to use it because I like the little bit of qualities that that imparts to the dough. So that's it for the ingredients. Okay, let's mix our pretzel dough. Let's add our barley malt extract here, our yeast, our salt. Keep the salt separate from the yeast. That's important. Salt is a yeast inhibitor. It holds back the action of the yeast, and it sometimes kills the action of the yeast if you leave them together for too long, which is normally not a problem here, but just be careful. Don't get them close to each other. Our softened butter, voila, and our water. Now for pretzel dough, the water temperature is important. You need cold tap water. Why? We want to keep our pretzel dough cold. That's going to lower the activity of the yeast. Yeast activity is increased with temperature increasing. It's going to make the pretzels much easier to shape if we keep the dough cooler than a normal bread dough. So that's our goal here, is to keep the dough cool to facilitate easier shaping of the pretzels. So cold tap water is fine. You don't have to take temperatures or anything like that. Just make sure you have cool to cold tap water. In fact, in the summertime when the temperature is warm in commercial bakeries, they often add ice chips to the water they use to make pretzel dough if they make in volume, just to keep that temperature down. So here we go. We're going to start off with 400 grams of water, but it's a good idea to keep a little bit extra on hand because water quantities in bread doughs are always variable, depending on a lot of things. The way the flour was milled, the humidity in the room, the temperature, all that good stuff. So we may need a little bit more water. We'll see as the dough mixes. And this is kind of a, the more you do this, the better your eye becomes as to how the dough should look. We're going to always start off at the lowest temperature. Would help if I would plug it in. There we go. Always start off on low speed. Now the dough's going to look shaggy at first and you're going to think, oh my God, what did I do wrong? But don't worry, it'll come together. And this is on low speed. This is where we determine whether the bread dough needs some more water. And that comes with experience, like I said. The more you make pretzel dough, any kind of bread dough, the more you develop an eye for how the dough should look. So far, so good. A little later on too, I'll show you guys how to knead the dough by hand in case you don't have a fancy schmancy mixer like this one. you can certainly knead the pretzel dough by hand. It's a workout. You'll need about 8 to 10 minutes of some real hardcore kneading, but you can do it. You don't need a fancy schmancy mixer like this one. Okay, see how shaggy it looks now? That's okay. I can tell already though that it's going to need just a little bit, and a little goes a long way. You have to be careful. It's going to need a little bit more water. I'm going to add just a little bit more and see what happens then. I'll stop the mixer periodically too and feel the dough. You can tell a lot by the feel of the dough, how it's whether it needs more water or not. And typically flours with a high protein content, strong flours, they're known in baking jargon as strong flours, they will typically take more water than a weaker flour, a flour with less protein content. So if you're using bread flour, chances are you may need a little more water than this potential. I can tell it's going to need just a little more. Just a couple of drops there, that's all it takes. Mixing, I'll clean this up. Now that's starting to look the way it should look. Up a little bit to about a medium. All right, let's turn it off and check it again for I could use maybe a little bit more water. That should do it. All right, we'll let that water incorporate, and then I'll take the dough off the mixer and show you guys how to knead it by hand in case, like I said, you don't have such a fancy mixer as this. Okay, I'm going to stop the mixer at this point, and like I said, show all of you how to knead the dough by hand in case you don't have a mixer fitted with the dough hook attachment. So take your dough out. Notice I shouldn't need any flour at all. This is a relatively firm dough, but we want it to be elastic also, and in order for that to happen, we have to develop the dough and knead it. So be rough with the dough. Push like that with your hand and bring it over. Give it a quarter turn. Push, bring it back. Push in all directions. That's developing the gluten. That wonderful stretchable network of proteins that's going to trap all that carbon dioxide gas. Like I said, this is going to take a good 8 to 10 minutes of vigorous kneading like this to develop the dough. But you can do it by hand. You can already see the dough getting a little smoother and a little more elastic. Now, in order to save time, I'm going to throw it back on the mixer. That was strictly to show you that it can be done by hand. Okay, let's put it back on the mixer. Continue mixing to what we call full development, and I'll show you how you can tell that in a few short minutes. Okay, our dough's looking good, nice and smooth. Let's check it for development. Show you how. It's called the window pane test. All you do is break off a piece of dough and then you gently stretch it in all directions. And the thinner you can stretch the dough into sort of a membrane type affair without it tearing, the better developed your dough is. And this is looking really nice, really well developed. Yep, see, it's not even tearing at all, and it's really, really thin. You see that? You can see my fingers through it. That's a well-developed dough. So there you go. That's our dough. We're going to let it rest. Take it off the mixer. And we're going to let our pretzel dough rest for typically 15 minutes to a half an hour. And that's basically to relax the dough, relax the gluten, make shaping easier. Let's gather it into a manageable ball first. See, that's what you want. See how nice and smooth that is? Nice smooth dough. You can even see little air bubbles forming in it. That's good. That's what we want. All right, let's let our dough rest for, like I said, 15 minutes to a half an hour. Make sure you cover your dough, either with a slightly damp kitchen towel or, something like plastic wrap, because you don't want any kind of a skin or a crust forming on the dough. So, take a nap for a half an hour and I'll see you back then. Okay, our dough is rested. Let's take a look. Oh, look how pretty. Nice and smooth. We can see it's relaxed a little bit. It's going to be more malleable. Beautiful dough. Okay. Oh, by way of reference too, I forgot to mention while the dough was mixing that it did mix on the mixer, I don't know, probably about 7 to 8 minutes, just so you have a point of reference as to how long the dough mixed before it was fully developed. So let's scale. That's the next step in our pretzel production here. We're going to scale individual pieces. And typically pretzels are scaled anywhere between 80 and 100 grams each, depending. That's like 3 to 3.5 ounces. I'm going to go towards the heavier end of the scale and scale these at 95 grams each. So let's do that. Oh, a little more. Gee, out of practice. There we go. Okay, I'll scale these and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to pre-shape them. Okay, I've scaled our dough and I've ended up with a baker's dozen, 13 pieces of dough, but I also have these little bits of dough left over. We're not going to waste them, of course not, so we're just going to kind of eyeball it and put them on the pieces of dough that we have left. We don't want to waste them. And this little 1 or 2 grams of extra dough is not going to make or break the outcome of the pretzels. And the reason we want to get them basically the same weight is so that they bake evenly, of course. So I'm going to show you now how to pre-shape them to make the final rolling out of the pretzel a little easier. And that's a simple process. Just take your little pieces of dough, flatten them out a little bit, fold the ends in so you get kind of more or less a rectangular shape here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then just simply fold them over like that and seal them. See? That's it. Make sure the seam is on the bottom. Set them off to the side. Another one, flatten it, bring the ends in, over again, and then just seal it. They don't all have to be perfect. This is just a pre-shape. And then we're going to line them all up. Once again, flatten it, bring the ends in, fold it over again. You can see how smooth the dough is, and if you see a real close-up, you can see real tiny bubbles forming there of that trapped carbon dioxide gas, which is really cool. Okay, I will finish pre-shaping these, and then we'll come back. The important thing to remember too is to, after they're pre-shaped, to cover them with plastic wrap again, or with a dampened kitchen towel, because you don't want any kind of skin forming on the end product of the dough at this point. So we'll let them rest after they're pre-shaped for only about 5 or 8 minutes or so, just so they relax, and then we'll come back and we'll do the shaping of the pretzels. So see you back then. Okay, let's shape our pretzels. Nice, look how nice. Okay, flip them over so that the top now becomes the bottom. Once again, flatten a piece of dough out, and much like we did before, fold them over on top of itself, seal it well, and this is once again kind of a pre-shape, because if we try to roll it out to the entire length it needs to be, it's going to tear at this point. Sometimes you can get it to roll out to the full length, but not very often, at least not with this dough. So we're going to let that rest up here. We'll do about 6 or 7 at a time, and then come back and shape them into the pretzel shape. So once again, seal it, roll it out, starting in the middle and kind of tapering a little bit. See the seam? You can see the seam here. Make sure that's facing up. In other words, the part that was facing up here now becomes the bottom. Flatten it out a little bit and start at the top. Roll it over on itself once, twice. And notice I'm not using any flour. You shouldn't need any flour here. This dough is very elastic. It's very workable. In case, however, and this is a helpful hint, a skin happens to develop on your pre-shaped dough pieces and it becomes hard to roll out, all you have to do is get a little spritz bottle here and very gently just spritz a little water on your surface. A little goes a long way, and that'll help you in shaping your dough. That's in case it dries out a little bit, or in case by some chance you get too much flour on your work area. So there we go. We'll do about 7 of these, and then we'll come back and shape the pretzels proper. Start at the middle, and as you get towards the ends, increase the pressure a little bit. That's going to help in the final shaping. There. What do we have here? 2, 4, 6, 7. Okay, let's start at the top. That's the other thing when you go to this portion of the stage of pretzel making. Make sure you start with the first pretzels you pre-shaped and work that way down, as opposed to going last up to the first. Once again, increase the pressure as you get towards the end of the dough strand, but not all the way to the end, because in real pretzel baking, it's a sign of, I don't know, you know what you're doing. If you get these little buttons at the end, Knöpfle, they call them. It's not a big deal, trust me. It's just, once again, the pretzel nerd coming out in me. Okay, now we're there. That's a basic shape, okay? Thicker in the middle and taper towards the end. So there we go. It's about probably, I don't know, almost 2.5 feet long, this piece of dough. So now it's time to twist. So in order to do that, we bring it around like this, and about 1/3 of the way down, we cross the strands over each other. Then we do left over right, so you get that little twist in there. And then down like that, and press those little buttons into the dough. And there you get the typical pretzel shape. Okay, then we're going to transfer that to our baking sheet. There we go. Pretzel number 1 done. Make another one. Start in the center, increase the pressure, hand pressure, as you move towards the end of the dough strand. If you do that, it relaxes the dough too. And once again, bring it around. 1/3 of the way down, kind of. Twist left over right. There you go. Put it on the baking sheet. And on to the next. Now, in a production baking shop, if you did every pretzel that way, you'd be there forever. So you need to find quicker ways to get this done. And that's where the activity called Brez'n comes into play. That's this. Pretzel slinging. Brez'n. Okay, one more time. It's hard to do in slow motion, but I'll try. And like everything else, it just takes practice. I don't want any of this to feel intimidating to you, because believe me, anybody can do this. It's like anything else. It just takes practice, and after a while, you develop a feel for it. Okay, one more time. See? One more? All right, Chrissy. There we go. Okay, I'm going to finish shaping all these pretzels. Now, once they are shaped and all on the baking pans, we're going to let the pretzels sit at room temperature for about anywhere between 20 minutes to a half hour. Some bakers even let them sit out for an hour or so. We want them to increase in size a little bit, but not necessarily double in size. And we don't want to cover them. We want them to form a skin. At this point and that is for one reason and one reason only, and that is to help prevent the lye solution from soaking into the interior of the pretzel. Okay, so at this point we want kind of a thin skin to form on the individual pretzels, so that's the reason we don't cover them at this point. Okay, so after they're proofed or have risen for about 20 minutes to a half hour, then we're going to put them in the freezer, and I'll tell you why when we come back. Okay, it's been about a half hour. Our pretzels have gotten noticeably lighter, a little bit poofier. Once again, we don't want them to get too increased in size. Doubled is not what we're looking for here. And at this point, we are going to put them in the freezer. Or alternately, you could put them, if you have room, in your refrigerator overnight. I prefer the freezer method because they're, I think, a lot easier to handle when it comes time to dip them in the lye solution. So that's what we're going to do. And then, after they're frozen, we'll see you back here and we'll dip them in the lye solution and bake them. Okay, our pretzels are frozen. It only took about an hour and a half, 2 hours in the freezer. So let's turn our attention now to the lye solution that they have to be dipped in. Who in the world would ever dream of dipping a food product in a caustic solution? Well, there are a couple of theories regarding that, and some of the most popular ones are that it happened way back when a neighborhood cat made its way into a bakery and dumped a whole pan of pretzels into a bucket of lye solution. And the baker didn't want to waste his product, so he baked them anyway, and they were a hit with the people in the village. Another one says that in 1837, a Munich baker by the name of Anton Nepomuk Pfannenbrenner, instead of glazing his pretzels with a sugar syrup, which was a way they were often made too, there's a sweet variety of pretzels, he grabbed the brush that was in the lye solution that was meant for cleaning the baking pans instead, and brushed his pretzels with that solution. He didn't want to waste them either, so he baked them. These were for the royal court, Bavarian court in Munich, and everybody loved them. So, who knows? But anyway, the result is that now we do dip pretzels in a lye solution, a food-grade lye solution. So let's talk a little bit about that. This is one of the sources for micro beads or food-grade lye granules. It's called Essential Depot. And once again, at the end of the video, we'll have a list of websites you can visit for ingredients and supplies like this. So here is our granular lye, and as you'll see in the recipe we're going to post, this lye looks a lot like kosher salt, but it goes into 1 liter of cold water, and this is 45 grams of lye. 45 grams of lye beads or lye granules to 1 liter or 32 ounces of, or 1 quart of cold water. Do not use a metal vessel for mixing the solution. Use either glass, ceramic, or plastic. You run the risk of a chemical reaction if you use it in metal. And be very careful. Notice what I'm wearing. Make sure you have food handler's gloves on. Some people even wear eye protection. It is caustic, so you have to be careful with how you handle it. All right, so we're going to add it gradually and we're going to whisk. And the solution's going to look opaque at first, kind of milky. But you have to stir it for a good 3 to 5 minutes for it to turn clear. That's what you're looking for it to be a clear solution. See how it's looking opaque and milky? It'll eventually turn clear, and that's what you're looking for. Notice what I have my work surface covered with also. Plastic wrap, or there's a garbage bag over there, a plastic garbage bag, anything like that to protect your work surface in case of any spills. I don't think it's as critical with a granite countertop, but any wood surface or anything like that, it becomes an issue. Okay. We'll come back when this is a nice clear solution and we'll dip our pretzels. Okay, our lye solution is nice and clear now. Looks just like water, but it's not. So let's start dipping our pretzels. So we're going to put them in the lye solution. I'll do 2 at a time here to save time. And you only have to leave them in there for a short time, not even a minute, just so they're coated with the lye solution. Let the excess drip off and place them back on the silk pad. Now, typically pretzels are sprinkled with salt. There is a specific pretzel salt you can buy too. I don't have any, I ran out unfortunately, but kosher salt works just fine. So that's what we're going to use today. And once again, a source for pretzel salt, or a couple of sources actually, is on the flyer that we'll post at the end of the video in case you want to order pretzel salt. And it's a good idea after you have about 3 of them. Since they are frozen, this is going to eventually freeze too. It's a good idea to start sprinkling salt on your pretzels. Don't need a lot. Well, it's up to preference. If you don't want salt, don't put salt on them, but a little bit is good, I think. This brings to mind the saying of Brez'n too. That's a Bavarian expression. Brez'n means pretzel, person who salts the pretzels. And it's kind of derogatory because it's meant to signify a person, kind of a gopher, somebody who does a menial task. So if you say to somebody, Wer war gestern dein Brez'n? Who was your pretzel salter yesterday? Who was your gopher yesterday? Who did you pick on yesterday? Just a little fun fact. We'll provide those at the end of the video too. All right, I'll dip the rest of the pretzels and then we'll come back and put them in the oven and start the baking process. See you then. Okay, just to reiterate, once again, the whole point of freezing or chilling the pretzels is to make sure that this lye solution doesn't penetrate into the body of the pretzel. These pretzels indeed are still frozen. They have been dipped in lye and they're salted. They're going to go in the oven in just a few short minutes. Now, you do not have to dispose of this if you bake pretzels on a regular basis. You can save it in a well-sealed glass jar or something like that, and you can store it out of the way of everything in a cool, dark place. So, but I'm not going to be baking pretzels anytime soon, so I'm going to get rid of it. So let's put our pretzels in the oven, and we'll see you back here. Once again, our oven is at 425 degrees, relatively hot oven. We're going to put our pretzels in and we're going to bake them to a nice rich brown color, 15 to 20 minutes depending on your oven. Okay, we're going to switch our pretzels around a little bit and bring the bottom ones to the top. They need to bake a little bit longer. They need to be a rich brown color. So next stop will be when they're finished baking. Okay, our pretzels are out of the oven. Beautiful. Make sure as soon as you can handle them safely, take them off the baking pans and pull them on wire racks so they don't get soggy on the back. And there you have it. We'll wrap things up in a few short minutes, so we'll see you then. Well, there they are, everybody. Authentic Bavarian Laugenbrezeln. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope that some of you get a chance to try the recipe too. Don't be intimidated by it. You can do it. Anybody can do it. It just takes practice. my good buddy Walter Kraft, who is another avid pretzel baker, and I would love to have more of you join our ranks. So, until next time, everybody stay healthy, and we'll see you again on Gauverband Nordamerika Eats. Bis zum nächsten Mal, bleibt gesund alle miteinander und pfiat den Gott. Prost! Thank you.